It is 20 degrees outside, and there is washing on the line. In 1954, a farm wife hung laundry out in the dead of winter, and it came in dry. Not damp, not stiff and half frozen and finished off by the stove, dry and folded and put away, in weather that would have most people today reaching for a machine without a second thought. And she was not being stubborn about it. There was no electric dryer in that house, certainly, but that is not the interesting part. The interesting part is that the method works. It is happening on Amish farms and in half of Northern Europe this afternoon. And almost nobody in this country understands why it works, which is why almost nobody tries it. Now think about your own laundry. If you have a dryer, it is very likely the second biggest electricity user in your house after the water heater, and it is running several times a week for the sake of something the air outside will do for nothing. And it is doing something else while it runs, which I will get to, and that part will annoy you more than the bill does. I grew up in a house with a line that ran from the corner of the porch to a post out by the garden, and it was used in January the same as it was used in July. There was a length of clothesline, a bag of pins, and a prop, which was a notched pole you used to push the middle of the line up once it was loaded. That is the entire equipment list, and none of it has changed in 100 years. By the end of this, you will know how cloth dries at 20 degrees, which is not the same way it dries in summer and is genuinely surprising the first time you understand it. You will know the one thing about winter drying that decides whether it works or whether you bring in a load of ice. You will know what your dryer is actually doing to your clothes, which is not what most people think. And you will know the one place you should never hang wet laundry indoors because people do it every winter and cause real damage. Stay with me because the second part is the part nobody explains. Here is the reframe. Frozen laundry is not wet laundry, it is drying laundry. That is the whole thing, and it is the piece everyone is missing. When you hang a wet sheet out at 20 degrees, the water in it freezes. Everybody knows that, and you can see it, and the sheet goes board stiff, and you can knock on it. What most people do not know is what happens next because they bring the sheet in at that point and conclude the whole idea is nonsense. Ice does not have to melt to leave. It can go straight from solid to vapor without ever passing through liquid, and that process has a name. Sublimation. It is the same thing that shrinks the ice cubes in your freezer if you leave them long enough, and it is why old snow slowly disappears on a bright cold day when the temperature never once climbs above freezing. So a frozen shirt on a line is losing water the entire time it hangs there, slowly and quietly, and without ever going soft. The ice is turning to vapor and blowing away, and after some hours, what is left on that line is a shirt that is stiff for a moment, and then, once you bring it inside and it warms, is simply dry. That was the trick. Not toughness, not doing without. Physics that most people have never had explained to them. And there is a second thing happening alongside it, which is at least half of why this works so well. Cold air is dry air. Very dry air can only hold so much water vapor, and how much depends entirely on temperature. Warm air can hold a great deal. Cold air can hold almost nothing. So even air that is fully saturated at 20 degrees, air you would call 100% humidity, is carrying a tiny fraction of the water that summer air carries. That is why laundry can dry outside on a cold, clear day faster than you would ever expect. And it is the same reason your skin cracks and your nose bleeds in January. The air outside is thirsty and it will pull moisture out of anything it touches, including a sheet. So the two things work together. The dry air pulls and the ice sublimates, and the wind moves the boundary layer away from the cloth so the process can keep going. Now here is the part that decides whether it works, and it is the piece that separates people who succeed at this from people who try once and give up. You need wind and you need sun, and you need to give it time. A still, gray, damp day at 35 degrees is a worse drying day than a bright, breezy day at 15. That sounds wrong, and it is completely right. Wind is doing most of the work because moving air carries the vapor away from the surface instead of letting it sit there in a saturated layer. And sun, even weak winter sun, warms the fabric well above the air temperature and drives the process hard, which is why the timing matters. That washing went out early and it stayed out all day, most of the daylight, and often it came in at dusk still slightly stiff and finished on a rack by the stove for an hour. That last hour indoors is not cheating and it is not failure. That was always part of the method. The line did 90% of the work for nothing, and the house finished the job. And it is worth knowing what the alternative cost because it explains why the line stayed up. An electric dryer in the middle of the 1950s ran well over $100, which was serious money in a farm household, and then it wanted a heavy circuit run to it, which a lot of old farmhouses simply did not have. Plenty of rural places had only recently got electricity at all. So, for most of that decade, the dryer was not a thing a farm wife declined. It was a thing that was not available to her at any price she could justify. The line, by contrast, was 50 feet of rope and a bag of wooden pins, and it lasted years. That is the comparison that shaped the habit, and the habit outlasted the reason for it, which is usually how good methods survive. I tested this properly 2 winters ago because I wanted to know rather than guess. I hung two identical loads on the same day. One went outside on a line at about 25 degrees, breezy, thin sun. The other went on a folding rack in a spare bedroom indoors, which is what most people do in winter. I went out at 3 hours, and the outdoor load was frozen solid, stiff as cardboard, and I would have sworn it was a failure. The indoor load was still cold and wet and looked, if anything, better. I left them both. At sundown, about 8 hours, I brought the outdoor load in, and it was very nearly dry. Everything but the thick seams and the waistbands, and those finished in an hour on a rack in the kitchen. The indoor load took 2 full days, and by the second day, the spare room smelled musty, and the window in there had water running down it, same house, same water, same day, and the load that looked like a disaster at 3 hours was done first by a mile. That is the number to carry out of this. Not a temperature. 3 hours is not the test. 8 hours is the test. If this is already making you think about that line you took down years ago, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn the notification bell on while you are there. I put out one of these every week, the old practical knowledge that worked for 100 years and got quietly replaced with something you have to plug in. The bell is the only way these reach you, then stay right here because the next part is what the machine is doing to your clothes. Here is the second part, and it will change how you look at your dryer. That lint you clean out of the filter is your clothing. I want you to sit with that for a second, because most people have never thought about where lint comes from. It is not dirt the clothes went in clean. What is in that trap is fiber, torn off your garments by tumbling and heat, and every load you dry puts more of your towels and shirts into that filter and into the bin. That is what wears clothing out, not wearing it, drying it. Run a towel through a hot dryer a few hundred times, and it is measurably thinner than it started because a meaningful part of it is in a landfill as lint. A line does none of that. Nothing abrades anything. The cloth hangs there, the water leaves, and the fibers stay where they were. The same goes for elastic, for printed graphics, for anything with any stretch in it. Heat is what kills those waistbands that go slack, shirts that come out a size smaller than they went in, printing that cracks. Almost all of that is the dryer and not the wash. And there is one thing the line does that no machine does: sunlight. Ultraviolet is a mild natural whitener, and it kills a good deal of what lives in fabric for free on the same afternoon. That is why old sheets went out white and came in whiter, and why a line-dried sheet smells the way it does. That smell is not soap. It is the sun breaking compounds in the fabric down into new ones you can smell. No bottle in the store contains it, though plenty are sold trying. Now let me tell you about the money. A clothes dryer is typically among the largest single electricity loads in a house, right there with the water heater. Run one several times a week for years, and it is a genuine line on your bill. And every bit of that is being spent on something the outdoors does for nothing. But the bill is the smaller half. A dryer is a purchase, then a repair, then a replacement in 10 or 12 years, and meanwhile, it has been quietly eating your towels the whole time. Clothesline is rope and a bag of pins, and there is no version of it that breaks in a way you cannot fix with a knot. And look at the ring of products around the machine. Dryer sheets and fabric softener are sold to fix problems the dryer creates. Static is a dryer phenomenon because static comes from tumbling dry fabric against dry fabric. Nobody on a line in 1954 needed either product because the problem did not exist. I am not telling you there is a room somewhere where men decided this. There is not, and a dryer is a genuinely useful machine, particularly with small children in a wet climate. What happened is simpler and worse. It is a quiet agreement among everybody who profits to sell the machine and then sell the cure for the machine, and never to mention that the sun and the wind will do the job. Nobody has to coordinate, and nobody has to lie. A rope is not a product, and so it never comes up, and it has not come up for 70 years. There is also the part that has nothing to do with money, and it is worth naming. In a great many American subdivisions, the clothesline is banned outright by the Homeowners Association on the grounds that it looks poor. That is a real thing that exists, and about 20 states have passed some form of right to dry law pushing back on it. Somebody had to legislate for the right to hang a sheet in your own yard. If that landed, hit like and subscribe, and ring that bell. Now, here are the warnings, and there are real ones, mostly about what happens when you bring this indoors. First, and this is the big one, do not dry laundry indoors in winter without ventilation. A single load of wet washing puts a surprising amount of water into the air of your house, and in a sealed modern home in January, that water has nowhere to go except onto the coldest surfaces you own. That means condensation on windows, damp in the corners, and mold in the walls. If you dry indoors, run the bathroom fan or crack a window in that room, and do not shut the door on a rack full of wet clothes in a spare bedroom, which is exactly the room nobody heats and nobody checks. Second, never dry laundry directly on a radiator or up against a wood stove or a space heater. Fabric against a hot surface is a fire, and this causes house fires every winter. Keep a rack a good distance away from any heat source. Third, and this is the one people do not expect, do not tumble dry anything that has oil on it, and be careful hanging it too. Rags with cooking oil, linseed oil, or stain on them can heat up on their own as the oil oxidizes, and they have started fires in laundry piles and in dryers. Oily rags do not go in a machine, and they do not go in a heap. Lay them flat outside to dry, or put them in a sealed metal container of water. Fourth, clean your dryer vent, not just the lint trap. Lint packed in the duct behind the machine is one of the more common causes of house fires in this country, and almost nobody does it. Once a year, pull the machine out and clear that pipe. Fifth, be sensible outdoors. Ice underfoot at a clothesline post in January is exactly how people break a wrist. Salt or grit the path, and if the ground is treacherous, that is a day to use the rack indoors, and on the line itself. A rope loaded with wet washing in a wind carries real force, so post it properly and keep the line above head height so nobody walks into it in the dark. So here is exactly what to do. Put a line up and put it where it gets sun and wind, which usually means the open side of the house rather than tucked against a wall. Even a retractable line off a wall to a post will do. Pick your day rather than your date. A bright, breezy, cold day beats a mild, gray, damp one every time. Watch the forecast for wind, not temperature. Hang it out early and leave it out. All day. Do not judge it at 3 hours because at 3 hours it will look like a failure and it is not. Shake each piece hard before it goes on the line and hang shirts from the hem and trousers from the waistband so the thick parts are at the top where the air moves most. Bring it in at dusk, and if the seams and waistbands are still stiff, finish them on a rack indoors for an hour in a room where the air moves. If you have no outdoor space at all, a rack near a cracked window or a running bathroom fan is the whole indoor version, and it will still cut your dryer use substantially. And if the stiffness bothers you, and it does bother some people, half a cup of plain white vinegar in the rinse strips the detergent residue that causes most of it, and a minute in the dryer on air, only at the end, will soften anything. One more thing, because it is the part I actually remember. Monday was wash day, and it was not a metaphor. It took the whole day, and it was the hardest physical work in that house, harder than anything the men did that day, and nobody said so out loud. Water carried and heated. A wringer that would take a hand off if you were careless with it. Hands in cold water in January. I am not going to stand here and tell you that was better. It was brutal. And the machine that replaced it gave those women back a day a week of their lives, and that is one of the genuinely good trades of the last century. But the line was not the hard part. The line was the easy part. It was the 10 minutes at the end where you stood outside in the cold and hung it up, and then it was out of your hands until evening, and that is the piece we threw away, along with all the misery for no reason except that it takes a few more hours than a machine, and it is not on a schedule. And there was a rhythm to it that I did not notice until it was gone. She could see the whole week's washing from the kitchen window. She knew what the weather was doing because she had to know. And somebody went out at 4 to bring it in, and that was a job a child could do and be useful at, and I did it a great many times without ever thinking of it as anything. I asked my grandmother once whether she missed doing it the old way. She laughed at me. She said she did not miss 1 minute of Monday, but she said she never did stop hanging things out right up until the end, and when I asked her why, she said the machine made everything smell like nothing. If you have gotten this far with me, hit like, subscribe, and turn on that bell. Nobody sponsors a video that says the answer is a piece of rope, so the only thing keeping this in front of people is you. You did not forget this. Nobody taught you, and then you forgot. It was taken from you one appliance at a time and one subdivision rule at a time until you were paying every month to do a job the wind outside your window has been doing for free the entire time. So do one thing this week. Hang one load out on a cold, bright day in the morning and leave it until dusk, and do not judge it at lunchtime. Then tell me in the comments how it went, what county you were in, and whether your family had a line and where it ran, because I read every one, and those stories are the reason I keep recording. And if this rang true to you, come back for the next one, because I am going to show you how she kept buttersweet and spreadable on the counter through the whole summer with no ice and no refrigerator, using a crock, cold water, and one thing about the lid that almost nobody gets right. Nobody sells it, so nobody teaches it. I will. Keep it simple, keep it yours. And remember, the people who dried a family's washing on a rope in January knew things we are only starting to remember.